Sprint speed here. I just wanted to take a few minutes to somewhat briefly go over the really interesting changes in the meta that have actually been going on around the world in the past few weeks, and how we've kind of seen a shift from the very top lane bruiser centric meta that we saw at Worlds over to the very 80 carry centric meta that kind of dominates the entire pick ban phase at the moment in pretty much every competition around the world. And just as a disclaimer, I used Games of Legends for this, and they don't actually have LPL for this week. I don't really follow LPL much, so I'm not really sure why that happened. Maybe they're on a break, or maybe the games hadn't been played or something. But anyways, so to get into this, first we have to talk about where the pick ban started at the beginning of the 2016 season. And a lot of it was just kind of carried over from Worlds. They saw that the really strong carries like the Fiora, Gangplank were really strong. And so those were obviously what people generally tend to revolve around to draft their pick ban phase. And with this large focus on the bruisers with Gangplank, and then Tom Kench actually saw a very large rise in popularity just after Worlds because of the new itemization changes and the changes to the masteries that allowed him to become a super tank with the additional regen and stuff like that to really make him a dominant force as an actual top laner. He wasn't really able to do quite as effectively at Worlds. So we saw a lot of zone control, which was really prevalent in the very early weeks of the spring season, because zone control is particularly effective against these melee bruisers, just because when you compare them to the ranged carries, obviously the ranged carries will have a larger width from which they can be effective in team fights. So zone control is primarily focused around being able to stop these really oppressive top laners that were completely dominating everybody from the likes of Smeb, Marin, everyone else. Obviously, there are a lot of really good top laners at Worlds. But I think what best characterizes the recent changes in the meta to shift much more toward an 80 carry centric style can be characterized by the fluctuation in popularity of Tahm Kench and Bard. So Tahm Kench was really hotly contested both in bans and in the top lane right when the spring season began in the LCSs and LCK. But he's really kind of fallen off the ladder because he gets kited really easily, and even though a lot of times people might say that Tahm Kench is a really good for your 80 carry because he allows you so much disengage, which is true. However, we've seen a huge rise in AoE engage, and that is something Tahm Kench really struggles with, and Tahm Kench's lack of really strong engage, especially when they nerfed the movement speed bonus off his Devour, pretty much allowed teams to exploit the weaknesses of the champion kit. And so as a result, Tahm Kench was started to get kited more. He wasn't quite as effective. Let me close Facebook real quick. Tahm Kench saw a really significant drop in importance, and Bard became hugely prevalent. Just to give a comparison, I did stratify this data to remove the LPL because like I mentioned, Game of Legends does not have LPL, so I didn't want to compare last week, 2 weeks ago that had LPL, and then the last week that I'm using, which does not. So basically, Bard went from being only picked once in the world by Matt on Team Liquid to being the second most contested pick in the support position. Alistar has completely dominated this entire season in the support position because he just pretty much does everything you would want from a support at the moment. But so what Bard allows you in comparison to a Tahm Kench support is that he has the longest single spell initiation in the game from that you can get from a support champion, as well as fantastic peel. Obviously, the Tempered Fate allowing you to get off, and also his Cosmic Binding being on a really short cooldown allows for that. So Bard has been increasingly played, and one thing that really kind of defines this utility, that really exemplifies how useful Bard is in terms of his engage, is that when we actually look at different regions and their Bard play, LCK and North America have had pretty similar results with Bard, where Bard is the second most highly contested pick. Even though he's a champion that takes a lot of practice, these teams just feel that he is so integral to their team composition that they have been picking him. However, he was not really played in the EU LCS, and what we see, only played once there. But one of the most interesting things about this trend is that when he's not playing the EU LCS, you're lacking that engage. So what happens is that EU LCS has actually picked Malphite 4 out of 5 times in the world in the last week. He was only picked once outside of Europe, which really seems self-explanatory. Well, if they're not playing Bard, then they have to get their engage in some other way. So they have 80% of the total Malphite usage in the entire world, discounting LPL and other smaller regions like LMS and Latin North and stuff like that, Brazil. But of the 3 major regions that Games of Legends has recorded, they do have 80% of the entire world's play of Malphite, which is really fascinating in and of itself. And so when you look at all the engage tools, again, every one of these have been pretty decent at with the AoE engages. You have the Malphite, Alistar, also extremely good. Then the Bard, Braum offers a little bit of AoE kind of stuff, and then you also have the Kalista, which gives you more AoE, obviously. One other thing that is probably significant to take note of when you're talking about Bard and Alistar being the premier support picks in the last week of professional play is that we've seen much fewer games revolve around and play toward 5 dragons in the NALCS at least. I think the Rocks Tigers have been focusing it a little more in Korea. I don't really follow. I follow mostly the LCS and NALCS most of all, just because I'm personally the most interested in that, and obviously it'd be a bit more of a complete analysis if I were able to have the time to review all the Korean games as well. But I mean, I'm a senior in college, so that time constraints are a bit of an issue. However, going back to the point is that what was my point? Oh yeah, so Bard and Alistar specifically are fantastic at tower dives because games haven't been revolving as much around the Dragon and the Rift Herald. A lot of times you'll see them take Dragon and Rift Herald just as kind of an afterthought, and then Rift Herald even is just kind of used to be able, by the junglers usually, to be able to clear more efficiently and gank more. But because the games have been revolving around 80 carries, being able to dominate lane, fast push turrets, Alistar, the best turret diver in the game, just because of his ultimate, has been the most. That's part of the reason why Alistar has been the most popular pick. Bard also very good at diving turrets in that regard because he can use his ultimate very creatively. And Bard especially suffers more when the game is much more spread out in terms of very wide open fights, just the nature of the way how you have to land the Tempered Fate. But you can use that to interact with turrets, and that does give you that option. And so I briefly mentioned earlier that zone control to deal with the really dominant melee bruisers is kind of on the way out a little bit, and that's also really reflected in the mid lane pool. So at Worlds, some of the most popular champions, obviously you still had the Victor, and Lulu was pretty popular, LeBlanc as well, those are still in the meta, but really strong picks at Worlds were also Anivia, Azir, and Viger. what do those do is that they provide you a huge safe space that prevents the enemy top lane carry from actually being able to engage on your team. However, because now the game is much more focused on these double AD carry compositions, or just having a single AD carry being able to completely dominate team fights by themselves, you see mid lanes shoehorned into one of two roles. Burst, to be able to kill AD carries, and support. So obviously getting wave clear is pretty important when you're talking about fast push meta, but Victor has been the #1 pick. He has a lot of burst and the wave clear. Then Lulu, support. Corki, a lot of burst and wave clear. Zillion, support, Ahri, burst. So it seems to be fairly standard trend. And then you get into the Lissandra, LeBlanc, which they do burst and they do offer a little more engage as well, but the most popular ones have been completely focused around being able to burst the opponent or being able to support their AD carries. Marksman carries, I guess I should say. And we've seen a huge drop in these zone control mid laners from the likes of Azir, who's played once by Phoenix, and then Orianna is a bit of zone control offer. Obviously, she offers a little more team fight burst just as a balanced champion, but she hasn't been that popular. Also, in relation to this, are the AD carry champion picks. The AD carries are all categorized into two categories. Either they can dominate lane, or they're Kalista. So, Lucian, Ezreal, Corki, Caitlyn, all of them with the exception of Caitlyn, run the Thunderlords and synergize super well with it, being able to just burst out your opponent, make them leave the lane. Tristana has been used a little bit, Misfortune and Jinx a little, but having these really strong lane dominant early champions has really been the meta, just to be able to get these fast pushes in and then be able to get a lead into the mid game and use your AD carries to dominate mid game team fights and end the game while the death timers are now fairly longer. And then Kalista, obviously, I talked about how important AoE engage was right now in the meta. Just, not even necessarily AoE engage, but just engage in general. And so Kalista does give you that extra option of being able to have a free, fantastic engage from your AD carry. I'd be a little interested to see why Ashe isn't quite as popular, because she does also offer that similar sorts of engage, but that might be, I'm not really sure, so I won't really comment on that. And jungle's been following kind of similar patterns where they have very high, the jungle meta has actually been very consistent in the last several weeks. AD carry as well, they've both kind of been fulfilling similar roles, but just strong early game, strong ability to kill squishy targets like the Graves, the Elise, Nidalee are all fantastic junglers to do that with. And as you can see, those are the top ones. And Rek'Sai, just decent power curve throughout the game, very similar to Lucian, so just a very safe pick overall. Now, in relation to this, there's one game that I saw last weekend that was actually really fascinating, because most of the teams on a macro scale have been adhering to these kinds of trends and changes in the meta. However, Cloud9 versus Energy, we actually saw the complete opposite of what I'm talking about. In relation to zone control, also you have the Echo and the Nunu, which have been popular picks in the past because they excel so much at zone control. But Cloud9, they go for a composition with Nunu and Orianna that are fantastic zone control, and they completely demolish Energy. So I looked at this game, and obviously it's very different from what I was kind of seeing in overall trends. So I kind of looked into it more specifically at the team fights and stuff. And I think what really makes this composition work is the Nunu, just because specifically Nunu not only offers general zone control with absolute zero, but when you're going against Energy that has a composition that relies Well, it does have the Gangplank, which I'll get to in a second as to why he wasn't entirely relevant in the game. But they have the Lucian, and Lucian, when you're against the Nunu's just an anti-fun champion. You throw the snowball, and the AD carry is not nearly as strong. And when you have Morgana on your team as well, that nullifies a lot of what Zillion can do, just because Zillion's stun isn't really instant. There is a bit of a delay where you can shield any people out of that kind of stun. So, to go back to the fact that they have Gangplank, that Gangplank has been a super strong pick, and he specifically wasn't very relevant in this game. If Nuno is focusing Lucian, the question has to be asked, why didn't Gangplank take over? Because obviously he can use Remove Scurvy to get out of the Nuno attack speed slow and stuff. But Cloud9 played this game very intelligently, where they got lead through the lane phase, and then where Gangplank in the lane phase, he offers his ultimate, but he's not really a super strong duelist in very early levels. He just basically uses Sheen and his barrels to be able to farm up, and then the late game team fights, he offers huge amounts of prowess just because he prevents the enemy from really kind of continuing to engage on them, because he can set up barrels behind him, and if the Gangplank team starts losing the fight, you can just extend them to be able to come ahead. However, in this game, the first major fight is near the Baron, where Cloud9, Gangplank actually doesn't even teleport until the fight's essentially over. So he throws his ultimate, but Gangplank's not even in that fight, and Cloud9 wins. And then the next big major fight is when Cloud9's already ahead by 10,000 gold. And you can see Gangplank is fairly effective, but then High and Jensen actually get chunked out really low, but they don't fall, partially due to the fact that they already have the Baron buff, and they are ahead 10,000 gold. So that's I think those are really interesting things to note. I'm interested to see if this changes or continues into the next week. But yeah, just some interesting notes. I wonder if EU is going to start picking up the Bard over the Malphite. I don't really know of any notable Bard players in Europe that I can really think of. But some interesting things to keep in mind. I would be interested to see if there's a way for a team to be able to create a composition that in their bottom lane that can survive early on, and then transition that into a type of Juggernaut type situation where the 80 carries that are really popular right now, they're popular just because they win lane phase so super well. And Lucian especially is really good because also the culling is really important to be able to clear waves super efficiently. But if a team, Rocks Tires, I'm looking at you, last year made the Juggernaut, if they can find a way to maybe work in like a Kog'Maw or some champion, I guess Kog'Maw specifically isn't doing that well right now, but just a champion to work with the really strong Lulu to actually have a super strong late game 80 carry. But that is that much more difficult with the rise in popularity of the Alistar and the Bard. So also, I did not really mention this in the supports. We have seen the likes of Janna, Morgana start to creep in, which offer your 80 carry more appeal, obviously, if you have engages from other parts of your team composition, like a Lissandra, or if you just go for the Callista, you can even use those to engage as well. So, alright, thanks for watching, and I'm excited to see what happens this next week. See you guys later.